All right. Howdy and welcome to today's American Nuclear Society program, Development of a US-based UNF recycling pilot facility and non-proliferation implications. I'm Shikha Prasad, the senior nuclear physicist at SLB, formerly called Schlumberger, and the ANS Nuclear Non-Proliferation Policy Division Vice Chair. I'm pleased to represent the division and serve as a moderator for today's conversation with Dr. Ross Radel. Thank you, Ross, for joining us. So let me introduce, before I introduce Ross, I do have a few quick brief notes. Today's program is being sponsored by the ANS Trustees of Nuclear, the Society's premier corporate membership program aimed at improving nuclear literacy in our schools, our conversations with policymakers, and our larger public discourse. To learn more, please visit ans.org/trustees. If you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A function. I will attempt to address as many as possible. And for those that we're not able to get through, we might have a way of addressing them later on that we'll talk about. The event will be recorded, and a link to the meeting, to the recording will be emailed, or the slides will be shared in one way, shape, or form after the webcast. Additionally, certificates of attendance for the event are available by request. Please see the chat for contact information. And finally, we ask that all participants adhere to the ANS Code of Ethics and Respectful Behavior Policy, which can be found at ans.org. All right, with those notes out of the way, I'd like to introduce our special guest, Dr. Ross Radel. Ross has served as Shine's Chief Technology Officer since April 2021. He has more than 20 years of R&D experience on a variety of fusion, fission, and particle accelerator technologies that are directly applicable to Shine's core technology and is licensed as a professional engineer. From 2011 to 2021, Ross served as a chief executive and as a member of the board of directors of Phoenix Nuclear Labs, where he led dozens of technical projects related to neutron generation and neutron-based detection methods. Prior to joining Phoenix, he served as a senior member of the technical staff at Sandia National Laboratories, where he worked to develop space nuclear power systems. Ross holds a PhD in nuclear engineering from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where his research focused on high-flux fusion neutron generation for detecting clandestine material such as HEU. Ross, please take it away, and thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. We get in the presentation mode here. And yeah, I thought I'd start out with a little bit of introduction about Shine, set the stage here. Shine at our core is a fusion technology company, really taking a unique approach, kind of what we view as a more sustainable approach towards fusion energy, is sort of in this 4 phases of starting with lower yield fusion-based systems to address, commercial needs, things like commercial, neutron radiography, DT irradiation services, and especially medical isotopes has been kind of a big jump forward and a large focus for us here for the last 5 to 10 years at this point. And so at this point, we're delivering lutetium-177, which is a cancer treatment isotope. And as I'll talk about more in the next slide, we're commissioning a facility, a 10 CFR Part 50 facility that's focused on short-lived fission product isotope delivery, especially Moly-99. And through those programs, we've built up a lot of expertise and experience in everything from licensing, nuclear construction, rad waste mitigation, all sorts of things like that, and really are sort of applying forward those lessons towards UNF recycling, as we'll talk to for the most of this presentation today. And we do view recycling having a hook towards transmutation, as I'll talk about a little bit more. Utilizing fusion neutrons, which of course would be a further stepping stone ultimately towards fusion energy. So in terms of where a lot of the focus is today and has been for the last better part of a decade, like I said, is on medical isotope production. Especially, I think relevant here is this facility. We call it the Chrysalis facility here in southern Wisconsin, which is this 10 CFR Part 50 facility that utilizes a number of fusion neutron drivers to excite a fission, well, 8 independent fission subcritical assemblies for the purpose of generating up to about a megawatt of fission and its associated fission products, and then being able to chemically harvest those fission products by basically transferring the solution in the aqueous subcritical assembly to other parts of the facility, chemically extracting out things like molybdenum-99, other short-lived fission products for medical uses, recycling that uranium right back into the subcritical assembly, firing it up the next week, and then obviously shipping purified fission products out the door. And so that has been a big endeavor, first of a kind facility, getting licensed as a 10 CFR Part 50 facility. We got our safety evaluation report early last year, about this time last year, and we're sort of moving through the equipment installation process to try to ultimately get obviously our operating license and move forward there. And it's really been that facility that has sort of given us the sort of I guess whatever ability to, we think, move forward to this next direction towards our next phase of spent fuel recycling here. So ultimately we're trying to develop solutions here to be able to provide obviously MOX and HALEU alternative products. We think that also is a big benefit here of being able to reduce the UNF volume and really have sort of a path forward of like, what are we going to do about the waste, and as a sort of just general way to support fission energy. And certainly, especially with our isotope background organization, we're very interested in sort of isolating, some select fission products and minor actinides, which have commercial value, and providing those as additional products and additional revenue streams for the facility as well. And so, as I said, we are looking to leverage these unique capabilities we've built up, through this other 10 CFR Part 50 facility, which, as I said, involves a lot of, handling of aqueous, uranium that's highly activated, a lot of the similar types of safety systems, whether it's, crit safety, things like that, and moving forward there. And so, our general approach to this has been to really, look hard at what has been working, in the sort of market today, if you will, and really we've been trying to partner with leaders in this space, especially Orano. It's a photo of myself and our CEO with some key folks at Orano and Argonne as well, who we've also been working with to not just take exactly what's been done today, but obviously looking towards the future of like, where can we improve, both the economics and to ensure that we're meeting sort of regulatory compliance, non-proliferation objectives, things of that nature, which is really sort of where we're at today. So the diagram on the right gives a very high level overview of sort of how we are looking to approach this sort of aqueous process. And there are a number of sort of innovations that we're trying to bring into the table here to both improve the economics of the system, like I said, and also ensure that we're sort of hitting, regulatory compliance and US policy as move here, especially from a non-proliferation perspective. So a few things I wanted to highlight here. Number one being this veloxidation process. That's essentially the act, after you're taking the, fuel rods, chopping them up through shearing. Typically that would go straight to a dissolution process in an aqueous recycling facility. We're introducing and working to introduce this veloxidation process, which is essentially heating up the fuel at that point to drive off some of the volatile fission products, especially things like iodine being very important to kind of get it all captured in one spot, as opposed to that iodine kind of moving through the process and being sort of in a number of different spots throughout the process. But it also sort of changes the chemical formulation of the uranium and true, and makes it sort of potentially easier to move through dissolution as well. And another critical one, which I'll talk about, especially as we get into the non-proliferation aspects of this, is the utilization of an alternative to the Purex process called the CODECON, the co-decontamination process, which is essentially a aqueous-based process where you ultimately end up with the plutonium always being blended with some small fraction of the uranium. So really the objective there obviously is to avoid a pure plutonium stream, but to still get a, sort of useful product out from the backside of it that can be repurposed into MOX. We've also been looking really hard at the removal of some of the minor actinides, and particularly at the ALSEP process, which is a specific process developed here in the US for minor actinide or actinide stripping from sort of the remaining material after the major actinides are removed. And that's, both as a precursor for, potentially transmuting that material down the road. And frankly, especially in a pilot facility scale, we see a commercial interest in a lot of those actinides as well at sort of the relatively small quantities. And, and as I said earlier, we're also interested in, developing sort of techniques to pull out targeted radionuclides and potentially, non-radioactive materials as well from that remaining raffinate, which, have commercial value to try to sort of bolster the entire economics of the process we'll talk about later on. And so, finally, because we're sort of pulling out a lot of these parts and pieces, and just as I think most here understand the general nature of this process, like, a lot of the volume is reduced, and in particular, we're looking at reducing volume by, something in the neighborhood of 95%. We are very interested in deep borehole disposal. And in fact, have done some studies with deep isolation and are advancing that as well, in particular as a means of sort of removing that last 5% or so of high-level waste. So we're sort of vectoring towards then with sort of that process, right, is a pilot facility. And so we're targeting a pilot facility that, essentially is able to demonstrate, not just the technology process I've just described, but also really we're trying to work it at a scale that we think will be able to give us sort of a demonstration of the economic potential. And so we think that scale is right around 100 metric tons per year, which is what we're targeting for this pilot facility. And we're specifically looking at starting with older fuel in this case, which helps, has some second order benefits that we see on that side as well. The objectives for this facility are really what I just talked about in the last slide, right? Like harvesting the vast majority of the U and PU for, use in new fuel, extracting the high value isotopes, as well as reducing that waste disposal, high-level waste disposal volume by a very large margin, and pulling out those minor actinides as a means to eventually move towards a transmutation process. And we think as we think about this pilot facility, we think Shine is in a really good spot, given the experience of having just constructed, licensed, and are moving through commissioning of a fairly similar first of a kind nuclear construction project. Sort of puts us in a spot where we feel confident we can execute on this and do it in an economical way, which is obviously very important as well. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about through sort of statutory, non-proliferation, regulatory, and economic considerations here. And I attempted, some of the pre-questions that came in, I attempted to address them here as well. And first on the statutory side, one of the questions that came up, and frankly, a question I asked a couple years ago when I started getting to this myself, was like, isn't this illegal in the US? Isn't this banned in some way, shape, or form? And it was true that President Carter halted recycling, effectively put a ban on it in 1976. That ban was lifted just a few years later by President Reagan, and it's been sort of in that status ever since. The current DOE policy is sort of somewhere in between. It essentially is explicitly as it says on the screen, right? The U.S. doesn't encourage commercial reprocessing, but continues to develop nuclear fuel cycle R&D to be looking at options and sort of watching as technologies and economics evolve. And as you might imagine, we've been interacting with leaders in DOE and trying to understand the nuances behind that and trying to work sort of with folks on the ground that are doing a lot of that great work to advance those technologies, like the ones I've described, right? There are policy those in place that certainly don't make it easy to go down this pathway, and that's a place that we're really trying to work as well. We're looking for things that are providing additional certainty on sort of waste disposal. I mean, there are talked about reducing high level waste. There's definitely like lower level waste forms that are coming out of a process like this, and ensuring that there's clarity on sort of like where the various parts and pieces can go is going to be really important, both from an economic and just sort of risk reduction standpoint. And another part of that as well is, like, as I talked about a number of times, right? We have a pathway to pretty dramatically reduce the high level waste volume But it's not clear, in the sort of current policies that there's really a value ascribed to that to sort of, reward that reduction in volume and reduction in need for geologic repository volume. Nuclear Waste Policy Act sort of feeds into this as well, as I'm sure many of you are aware, are of the recent rulings in Texas, sort of questioning the authority of sort of NRC for licensing different types of these facilities, and so we're definitely sort of watching that and seeing sort of how things play out there from a potential either changes to the Nuclear Policy Act or sort of new statutory changes that will provide certainty there, which I think is really the key for a commercial venture at this stage. Is I think there's a lot of different pathways that can lead to success that the federal government policies would lay out, but having certainty in what that pathway looks like is really, really important. And another one of these is 40 CFR 190, which really relates to effluent into the air in particular. And there's rules that have been looked at for a long time that probably again are not showstopper necessarily, but also don't seem to necessarily be based on kind of reality of a technical basis. And so I think that's a place where there could be improvements, let's say, to help sort of again provide clarity and certainty. From a non-proliferation perspective, this is something obviously very important, not just to folks in this room and this topic generally, but obviously is a bounding condition that we're really working hard to understand and work with. And so, as I addressed earlier, really the kind of core for this for us is the use of the Kodacon aqueous separation process as opposed to something like the Purex process to ensure that there's no pure plutonium stream generated at any sort of time through the course of the separation processes here. The figure here is pulled from this Bathke work that really just tries to kind of get to the heart of this, of noting that there's figures of merits for both plutonium and separated transuranics. Focusing on the plutonium side of it, the left plot here. As I said, we're looking at having a mixed uranium with plutonium mixture. The Kodacon process sort of can be kind of chemically dialed in, if you will, to change what that percent concentration looks like. And so one of the things we're assessing is where really is that right percentage that sort of makes the most sense, both from a proliferation standpoint and as you can see from those the various colored lines through there, that the sort of figure of merit and higher sort of means more of a challenge from a proliferation perspective, sort of that high category as it kind of shows on the right hand side, and then a medium category and a low category. We're really targeting being in that sort of medium to low categories for materials that we'd be having at this facility. That varies as a function of what the burnup is of that material. As you get to higher burnup, fundamentally you're going to have more fission products and more plutonium 238 sort of in the mix there, which sort of kind of brings you down towards the low as well. And so unclear, frankly, at this point exactly sort of what the direct consequences are of sort of staying out of high and into the medium low categories from security safeguards perspective, but that's something we're really working through right now. So we have been working really closely with Sandia National Labs on some of these assessments of what our specific process results in from a proliferation risk perspective. Our team has also been doing things like unmitigated dose analyses to understand dispersant consequences and accident risk, and kind of working through mitigation plans as we were having sort of early discussions with the NRC as well, and thinking about sort of facility layout, breaking up quantities of materials, those sorts of things. And so that work is ongoing. We're working as I said, with Sandia. We're also starting to engage with Argonne, and in fact we're just awarded a GAIN voucher where we're going to be sort of starting to look further at sort of a safeguards assessment here and trying to look at really early in the process, today in the process, really thinking about safety, security and safeguards as sort of a foundation for the program as we get going. So it's going to be, from our perspective, much more economical to be starting with those kind of anchor points in mind versus getting too far down the pathway and then having to try to retrofit those things in. From a regulatory perspective, NRC a few years ago, probably a decade ago or so now, did identify gaps in the sort of current licensing framework for how they would go about licensing a recycling facility. So there's not, a crystal clear roadmap that's just like, sort of fully smoothed out and ready to go forward. But, from our assessment and our discussions with NRC, we think that there is a pathway there within the existing framework, and that there are means to fill those gaps. And in fact, with the Shine, the Chrysalis facility I referred to earlier, we actually shared about half of the gaps also directly applied to that facility. So we've actually sort of worked through those gaps, many of them with the NRC, in order to get the license that we've already got, and have kind of continued those discussions as we're moving forward. And I think that really is reflected in, as it says here, sort of the general strategy that we have employed through the Chrysalis facility licensing, and now with the UNF recycling licensing, and sort of the lessons learned that have come in. And we've tried to be very communicative with the NRC and work with them very early and very openly through pre-application meetings, to make sure that we're sort of getting a lot of buy-in, understand sort of how we're thinking. They understand how we are thinking, we understand how they're thinking. And sort of working through that with them in order to keep that relationship as open, as smooth as possible. And and I think frankly one of the lessons also through there is like there are going to be things where not necessarily a full agreement, let's say, with sort of our perspective and theirs, and we don't necessarily. I think a lesson we learned was to not necessarily just like take the easy route, hit the easy button and sort of like accept some facet of the interpretation of a regulation or a whatever in a facility, because it's just like, oh, well, we can get there quicker, but then be, sort of stuck, if you will, with something that, maybe makes life harder for the next 40 years afterwards. And so really working through and understanding implications for, consequences of things we're working through. And again, we found that the NRC staff has been great to work with as we, kind of work through some of those more challenging implications. So, in terms of the current recycling pilot facility that I've talked about here, we have been engaged with NRC for over a year now. Kind of got a formal assignment of a project manager in Q2 2023, around this time last year, and then submitted a regulatory engagement plan and had our first pre-application meeting, which was a public meeting held in mid-November of 2023. We'll continue to obviously work through with them. I think we are targeting another pre-application meeting here in a few months, and really targeting an application for a construction permit in the end of next year, into 2025.
Ross, we have 5 minutes, a little bit over 5 minutes left. Thank you.
Gotcha. Well, I'll just quickly note, and I think I've already kind of talked to this, that obviously the economics is foundational to this, especially in a commercial venture. And so we're really working to make sure that from a product perspective, from an isotope perspective, we understand where they're at, and also from the cost side of things, right? We've got a great data point of the moly facilities I've talked about from a cost perspective, and trying to again leverage a lot of those same experiences that helped us get a cost-effective facility, and to sort of lean into the lessons that we're learning there on things like seismic considerations and how to get to an economical facility that still obviously meets all regulations and requirements. And so with that, I'll just sort of summarize here before we get to questions that we are really looking to leverage what have already been doing here. We're really leaning into spent fuel recycling, and review. It's not only exciting from Shine perspective. We think it's the right thing to do for the US, and want to try to kind of help drive the ball forward here. And we think we're in a good position to try to make some good stuff happen. So it's not like it's a slam dunk here. There's plenty of obstacles, as I've talked about here, that we're really working, but that is really where our focus is trying to drive down those risks and push the ball forward.